Coming off a third big weekend of 100 points to the winter races on the road to the Kentucky Derby. We're almost done. I know it's gone fast. We've got one more race left where you'll earn points. Not going to be a factor, though, on the Kentucky Derby trail. Maybe the Preakness, maybe the Belmont. But the money back special offer still there at HorseRacing and Xpressbet. Bailey, Armour, and I are going to talk about the Lexington, which is that last opportunity at the money back special. Plus, we're going to do a little bit of diving into last week's races. We'll tell you what we learned in both the Bluegrass Stakes and the Santa Anita Derby. Coming up next on Horse Sense.
Welcome back to another episode of Horse Sense. As always, I'm Bailey Armour, joined alongside the illustrious Scott Shapiro as we tackle yet another week of Keeneland racing, part of this 8-day stretch of Keeneland racing that we've had after the effects of the crazy floods that we've been having here in central Kentucky. I was driving around last night, went to Louisville for a concert and saw just some of the flooding in Louisville. And it is truly insane how much water is piled up around here. And it's going to take probably weeks to drain out. So things are very wet, but the racing continues on. And with that, we've got kind of a slew of promotions, including a special one this week. As many of you know, there was a harness racing driver, Hunter Myers, who was killed following an accident at the Meadows on March 19th. And this week, Wednesday through Saturday on the Meadows, Xpressbet and FirstBet will be donating 100% of our proceeds on the Meadows directly to Hunter's family, his fiancee, Chloe, and their young son, Hayden, who survives Hunter. Of course, our thoughts and prayers go out to the family. If you aren't familiar with the Meadows, we've got some daily picks posted on our blog, news.first.com. So check those out, play a little bit on the Meadows, and help us support a really good cause. In addition to that, as Scott mentioned, we've got the last week of our Triple Crown Trail Money Back Special in the Lexington Stakes at Keeneland. And then on Sunday, we've got another edition of a 2 million points hit and split on the Late Pick 4. Whew, I feel like I'm out of breath now talking about all those promotions. So a slower week in racing without these 100-point preps, but still plenty of action to get you involved. What about you, Scott?
Yeah, no doubt about it. Great cause for the unfortunate accident, and definitely something that I hope people, want to get involved in at least to a little bit of an extent, even if they're not familiar with the Meadows. The picks are available, like you said. For me, kind of a slower week, but going to do another Spaces on Saturday. Just going to roll through the Keeneland card. We'll talk about the Lexington, also the Grade 1 Jenny Wiley. And what's kind of cool about this card for me is I remember, I guess it was 7 years ago when I arrived in Kentucky. I got there on a Friday night. I stopped in Lexington before Louisville, where I moved. And I went to this card on that Saturday. It rained like crazy. Hopefully we don't see that, but figured I'd throw that in there on a slow week. So always have a little bit of a soft spot for this card.
That's pretty cool. I'm trying to think if I was here on that day 7 years ago. I think I probably was. I've been here for almost 10 years now. So maybe we ran into each other and didn't know.
Well, you were probably like, were you able to drink at that point?
No, I was 20.
Yeah, no, I wasn't at the bar. I don't want to act like I was, but I would assume we might not have unless we just kind of randomly. I'd assume you'd be down with the kids having a good. Actually, I hung out there having a good time before for sure outside there. So maybe we did.
Hey, the rail at Keene's a good spot to be.
Well, Bailey, I mentioned in the introduction that we are kind of done the road to the Kentucky Derby, but maybe a chance for Preakness horses. Horses will earn points on the road to the Derby in the Lexington. And as we mentioned a couple times already, money back special offer, last chance. It feels like we've flown through the road to the Derby. And I think, it always feels like that, I guess. But the Lexington has at least one or two horses that I think have some upside as we move forward. I don't necessarily think they're second tier. They just kind of got off the late starts to their season and aren't really prepared for a race like the Derby or weren't prepared to earn points. The main one there is number 7, Prater, $725,000. Keeneland, September 2023 purchase. Only loss came in the mud on debut at Saratoga last August. 2 impressive wins, one by a neck, but over Sovereignty in September, and then was off until last out when he put in an absolute clinic. He was supposed to at 2-5. He's the 2-1 favorite. He's tough to get by, but he is stretching out the 2 turns for the first time. Curious if you're going to be asking me to talk you off him or someone else in this Lexington field?
I am going to take a different approach in this Lexington field. Of course, not a big, necessarily a Derby prep race, but we've seen horses from this race go on to win Preakness, later classic races.
Derby
It's
won.
just so the Derby once. Charismatic in 1999,
Yep.
and who then won the
Picture on my
Preakness,
wall in my other room.
lost the Bell. Do you really? You'll have to show me.
Yeah, I made a lot of money on the Preakness. He broke my heart with Menifee in the Derby, but I came back.
Oh,
He was like $20
heart-wrenching.
horse after winning the Derby and the Preakness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember that Derby, but I have seen the footage. But
my
I
best
don't think
Preakness hit, because
of
like
all
a
time.
61 ran third, the chalk Menifee ran second, and I had to try for a couple bucks, and that was, I was in my young 20s at that point. So Bailey's
Back in the
friends
day.
listening are like, wow, that guy's really old.
That guy's so old. Yeah, I was 2. Almost. Actually, I wasn't even 2. I was almost 2
Yeah.
at that point. I was still, my birthday's like right around Belmont.
You helped get Chris Antley home, though, I think.
Yeah, so telepathically, me as a toddler was rooting him home for sure. So, but now,
who's your alternative here? Get you back on track here.
Grown up me is on Bullard, the number 3. I'm going to play against Prater. I know we've seen some short price horses at Keeneland, but I'm hoping we can get, maybe a third choice here in the races. Bullard is 9-2 on the morning line. Same connections as Your Guide Journalism, Umberto Rispoli and Michael McCarthy. This was a $675,000 yearling, so just shy of Prater's earnings. A horse from the female family of Better Than Honor, who of course produced Rags to Riches, that gave Michael McCarthy his Belmont win. Stretching out to 1 mile and 16th for the first time after 2 7-furlong races that were pretty impressive. I think something that I find interesting here, and maybe because I couldn't find anything about it. So they ran him on January 4th. He's coming back off of a 98-day layoff. He was entered in the Rebel, but then was a state scratch in the Rebel. And he was 5-1 in the entry box for the Rebel. Do you know why they scratched him? Because I couldn't find it.
I don't remember that. Let me see. Let me see if I can actually
live pull it up while we're talking about him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's the knock. That's the knock on the horse right now.
Right. Was it a fitness issue?
Spike the temperature.
Spiked a temp. Okay, so maybe got a little stick shipping. Mike McCarthy in an interview around early year time said that it's really hard to get to Oaklawn because of FedEx routes. So, but they did manage to find one here and bring him all the way out to Keeneland. I think this is a pretty good spot for him. Of course, not picking up a big impact in Derby points, but maybe we'll see him later in some classic races or in some other graded races this year. So I'm pretty keen on Bullard out of this field. What have you got for me?
Well, I mean, full disclosure, there'll be an article up on the Xpressbet and FirstBet blogs as probably before most of you or any of you might even see this video. I said Prater is my top choice, but if I had a money back special play, which I do,
hey,
I'm going to use it on Bullard because he's going to be, twice the price or so. That said, just more than Prater, he's got more questions to answer because not only is it his first try around 2 turns, pedigree suggests he should be fine, but you never really know. Pedigree only tells us so much. And then you got the break in the training. I know it was from a temperature, but when these 3-year-olds get going and they're building up, there's a reason why most of the ones that get breaks or have, missed works don't end up winning the Triple Crown races. And that's because, they're young horses. They need that foundation to build up. So, I think Bullard's got a lot of upside. Michael McCarthy, as you mentioned, is having a great year. Obviously, journalism leading the way for him. You might have another Preakness type horse here, like he did with Rombauer with Bullard. Mm-hmm. But, there's obviously reasons to wonder if he's going to win. He's never gone 2 turns. He's never been out of the state of California. I mean, Umberto Rispoli doesn't have a lot of experience riding in Keeneland, and we saw him get a little bit of trouble with journalism at a track he's familiar with. He's got a little bit of more of a turf jock mind in him, looking always to save ground. And, when you got the best horse, it's not necessarily always necessary in dirt races. But I like Bullard in this spot. I think Prater is going to be tough to beat. So I don't know if I talked you off. Probably not, but I probably gave you reasons to at least think about it again. 23 days as we record this from the Kentucky Derby, number 151. And we've done a lot of the Derby prep work. We've talked a lot about these horses from the start of the year, from the start of Horse Sense 2.0, in fact, Bailey. So hopefully those of you that watch this regularly feel comfortable with a lot of them. But it's kind of time where we start to segue into thinking about the Derby and who we might like in there. And I think, one way to start that conversation here is talking about some things we learned out of a couple of the big preps from last week, starting a new segment, in fact. What did we learn? And I'm going to let you start with what you learned out of the Bluegrass Stakes at Keeneland, because it's so close to you and so far from me now.
So close to me. This was a special Tuesday edition of the Bluegrass this year. And I will say I'm not going to necessarily say a handicapping tip, but if you're newer to horse racing and you want to start watching replays, in YouTube settings, you can go back and watch things in slow motion, which is a very useful tool, I think, if you can find a lot of these big replays on YouTube. But go back and watch it, 4 or 5 times, watching a different horse each time, and really see how they went around the racetrack, what their jockey was doing, how far down did the jockey hunker as they come down the stretch run. You can learn so much about a horse from watching replays, which is, part of what we did for this segment. So Tuesday's Bluegrass, Burnham Square, the eventual winner, comes from way off the pace. I mean, there was so much daylight between East Avenue on the lead all the way back to Burnham Square. And he's a very short coupled horse. I'll put in a picture of him and then a picture of journalism after we get to the Santa Anita Derby here in our feed, so you can see what I'm talking about from a horseman's perspective. He's really compact. He's compact and he has kind of a shorter neck, which means he has slightly shorter stride, but he works so hard to get himself to the front. And I will say it makes me a little bit concerned about his chances come May 3rd on Derby Day, on just how hard he's going to have to work to overcome this big giant field of 20 horses. He went so wide in the turn in the Bluegrass and was so sweaty after the end of the race. And like I said, he's a little bit of a smaller horse. He has to work basically like 25% harder than some horses that are bigger, that have a bigger stride. Such a big gap from the two of them. And he already runs in pretty big blinkers, which you can see the difference in his blinkers versus East Avenue's blinkers as he comes by. East Avenue runs in basically somewhere between a quarter cup and cheater blinkers, what we would call, where there's like almost no plastic rim on the edge of the blinkers, just a little bit to kind of limit their field of vision and help them focus. But Burnham Square runs in a much bigger width of blinkers to even focus him more. That's my biggest takeaway, is him going into this big full field of 20, is just how much ground is he going to have to make up based on his running style and already being a smaller horse. What about
Good
you?
points there. I mean, I went into the race. I like Burnham Square to win that race, and I said that I thought that was kind of his Kentucky Derby, quote unquote, his Christmas, that type of thought. I don't think he's going to move forward again in the Kentucky Derby. So adding that, and I definitely am aware of what it must be like to be a horse running against horses with bigger strides, because I've dealt with that my whole life. I'm sure you have as well, trying to run against people a lot bigger than me. My strides are very short, so understandable there.
Short King Spring.
For me, in terms of the Bluegrass, River Thames is a nice horse. I like what I saw from him at Gulfstream. I thought he ran a fine third in the Bluegrass. But what I learned is that he is definitely a horse that wants to go one turn in the end. Pedigree said that. We thought it maybe all along because of that. Then he gets nailed in a spot where in the Fountain of Youth, right, where nobody you don't really see Pletcher horses that are a favorite get nailed like that at Gulfstream Park. Now, credit to Sovereignty, but I thought that showed maybe a little bit. And then in the Bluegrass, we saw again. I think stretching this horse out to 1.25 miles in the Derby is probably what they're going to do. I get it. It would be hard not to, but I think they'd be best served from the horse's perspective. And I would be very attracted to him if they cut him back in the Pat Day Mile and gave him a shot there. So I don't expect that to happen with the, the money these connections put into the game. And a lot of that has to do with the Derby. And it's not like he's disgraced himself. But at 1.25 miles, I'm worried, really how things are going to go over that last furlong for him.
It's far, and it's difficult to get that distance. Now, going back to the other coast and back in time, slightly, of course, to the Santa Anita Derby from last week, what were your takeaways? I'll let you go first this time. What did you learn from the Santa Anita Derby about maybe your boy journalism, maybe about another horse? What did you see?
Well, I think the obvious one, and I hope I don't take yours, if I don't think I am based on kind of the way your approach was, but we definitely saw that journalism can overcome adversity. It wasn't the most terrible trip in the world, but if he's a horse that gets buried down on the inside a little bit in the Derby and can get out, we saw that he did not really let that mentally bother him, and he still came with that strong run. But I'm going to go with to talk about buys. Is it Beza or Biza? Why am I?
They said Biza. I thought it was Beza. So if you know, let us know in the comments. One of the two of us could be wrong either way. I don't know. I'll let you roll with however you want to say it. Okay,
Beza's
Beza.
easier off my tongue, I think. So Beza was a serious runner in that race. We thought it might be true. He didn't do anything wrong coming into the race. He only had the one poor performance, if you want to call it that, on the turf for a trainer that rarely wins at first asking. He's done virtually nothing wrong thus far, and he's a little bit more trouble away for journalism from winning the Santa Anita Derby. I learned that I want him in the Kentucky Derby, and I probably want to include him on my wagers if he gets in. I know he doesn't have the points right now, but he's got a lot of things going for him, including talent, pedigree. Obviously, he's the one out of the mare Puka who maged 2 years ago. And then Dornoch last year, I think they won a couple of big races from what I understand.
Just a few.
So that's a kind of a couple lessons. I hope I didn't steal one of yours.
No, I think that was actually a really good point, and I'm glad that you did talk about Beza because I want to touch on Citizen Bull and journalism. So going back to a horsemanship, how they're built, how they run kind of perspective. I watched this, like I said, over and over again a couple times looking at each horse. When you watch Citizen Bull run in the Santa Anita Derby, you can see how, and you have to watch it in slow motion and look at multiple horses in the race. But look for, he has a much shorter, thicker neck than a horse like Journalism does or a horse like Burnham Square does. I know he has, that's what we call basically where his neck like ties into his body, which means that he runs much shorter front to back. And he also runs really, really strong on the front end. Like there was no loose rein at all from Jockey Martin Garcia when he was riding him. I mean, he had him basically cranked up under him, never really got to get some space between him and the horse, kind of rate him back a little bit. Citizen Bull is just all gas, no brakes, basically from the beginning. And then as we saw him kind of burn out and he couldn't stay up with Beza and journalism, not that he really would have been able to try to, because he's just so heavy on the front end. He's so bullish, excuse the pun, but he really is. He runs like a bull. He truly does. Contrasting that with a horse like journalism, who, as they're coming down the backstretch, looks much more relaxed, like he's not out for a stroll. I mean, he's very clearly racing, but sitting back off that pace. And then he gets really comes off the rail a little bit and then almost cranks to the inside, like he's ready to turn on the jets. Jockey lets him go, and then he just absolutely flies on from back like that. So it was kind of a different closing approach than Burnham Square in the Bluegrass. But I will say, journalism was not my pick going into the Santa Anita Derby. I see now why everyone is so hyped about him. That was the kind of horse that I really wanted to look at and see and kind of study as we head into Churchill Downs for the Derby. That this is a horse I was never impressed by him before, but now I finally see, I think, what other people have seen.
Yeah, you weren't as bullish as others would be the way I would say it. It wasn't, you never really talked down on him, but you weren't gushing over him really until now.
No.
You texted me after. That's a good point. And, real quick, is the Citizen Bull what you're talking about? Is that why he's the lead type?
I think so, probably just because of how hard he breaks. He's so like thick almost, and he just barrels out of that gate, barrels into the race. And I don't think that he has, maybe, and I could be anthropomorphizing the horse a little bit, I don't think he has the mental capacity to kind of set himself back a little bit and conserve his energy. He just explodes basically. And if they cut him back a little bit, maybe on distance, that's a better strategy. I mean, I'm not a horse trainer,
That's not for me though. I think two-turn speed horses are two-turn horses. I mean, some of them can relax and come with a run because they just get out sprinted early in
Yeah.
those races and they're not on the front and that just happens. But I think overall those turn out speed cutbacks turn out to be overall poor bets on the dirt, in my opinion. The last thing I'll say on Citizen Bull is it's going to be interesting. The fact that he doesn't relax is not a good thing if you're based on what you're
No.
saying. Bob Baffert is seeing the same thing. He's gone to the front every time. His rider, Martin Garcia, thus far, he got the mount in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and he's won all of his races since. So Bob wasn't going to make any changes. I'd be surprised if Bob doesn't look to try to get. I mean, Pratt is only on Publisher thus far. Irad
Mhm.
really is only on River. There's guys out there that might have a better shot of relaxing this horse, or at least Bob is going to want to try. So it'll be interesting. Sanity Derby, always a fun race, and I thought this year was another example as person like me thinks we might have seen a Triple Crown winner.
Oh, I think it's too early to tell. I was
Of
having the
course.
same conversation yesterday, but journalism is a nice horse. I'll give you that. As always, thank you so much for watching another edition of Horse Sense. I'm Bailey Armour and was joined today alongside the one and only Scott Shapiro covering the Lexington Stakes at Keeneland this weekend. Make sure you check out all the promotions that we're running this week on Xpressbet and FirstBet. And like I mentioned, please take a look at the Meadows cards this week so that we can help support the family of Hunter Myers by donating 100% of our proceeds from Xpressbet and FirstBet directly to his family. As we continue to go through the Derby Trail, make sure that you are subscribed to the Xpressbet YouTube channel and go ahead, leave us a like, leave us a comment if you like what we've been doing here on Horse Sense. Let us know who maybe your early Derby horses here, what you thought about those Santa Anita Derby and Bluegrass contenders. And we'll see you next time on Horse Sense.